So Mayor Hancock leaves office as the most unpopular Denver mayor in recent history, if you believe the polling. Please raise your hand if you supported Mayor Michael Hancock's re-election in 2019. Up high. Please raise your hand if you believe the city of Denver requires a significant change in direction from the current administration. I want to ask you about taxation. Please raise your hand if you believe that Denver can meet its current needs with its current level of taxation. Please raise your hand if you do not see the need for additional tax increases. Okay? Do not see the need for additional tax increases. So the folks who are dissenting from that are Lisa Calderon, Aurelio Martinez, Jim Walsh, Leslie Herod with a hand wave, maybe there. Okay.
I think I misunderstood the question.
The question was, does Denver need to raise taxes to meet its needs, or can we just move the money around? Do you believe that it does need to raise taxes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Wait.
She answered a different question than what I asked. We're going to plow on and hope that everybody understood. The state legislature is considering lifting the ban on local rent control. Please raise your hand if you think Denver should consider some form of rent control. So those in favor of some form of rent control: Lisa Calderon, Jim Walsh, Aurelio Martinez, Ian Tafoya, Debbie Ortega, Terrence Roberts, and a middling hand from Leslie Herod, who's going to vote on this in a little bit, so we'll watch.
Can I clarify this?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay. Denver currently has what I consider our form of rent control. We were not allowed to do what we're doing now until the legislature gave part of that control back to local government.
You can do it on a very limited level,
yes,
but not in the broader scale that the state legislature
And that's what I support, is what we have in place today through our expanding housing affordability. We did have an inclusionary housing ordinance, which was basically—
I'm hearing you say you support the rent control we have now.
I do.
But not an additional.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll just add, since I was the middle of the road, that I do believe that rent control, some rent control policies need to be part of a comprehensive solution to ensure that people can afford to live in this city. Everything has to be on the table right now. Affordability is the #1 crisis in Denver right now. People can't afford to live here. We've got to put every option on the table.
30 seconds. Chris Hansen, does rent control work?
Kyle, it's never worked. Yeah. In the history of the world, it's never worked. Every time you put in rent control, investment in new housing goes to zero. Just ask our folks in New York City and San Francisco that have had huge problems with this policy. It's a mistake for Denver, I think, to go in this direction. If we want to accelerate housing opportunity in the city, let's use the incredible new allocation from the state and feds to get it done.
Thank you, Chris Hansen. 30 seconds, Lisa Calderon. Same question. Does rent control work?
Yes, and we need to look at it as an array of options. So it's not rent control in a vacuum. We also need to look at eviction defense and fund that. We need to look at just cause eviction. We need to look at higher wages. All of that will help people to stay in their homes. We also need to look at, when people are being evicted or foreclosed on, intervention. So it needs to all happen together.
Thank you.
I think you're missing the point that some people are renters. Who's a renter here? I'm a renter here. If you're a renter here and you're worried about their landlord jacking it up $600 in 1 month, then yes, absolutely you want rent stabilization and a form of rent control. If you're in your house and you're worried about property tax, we have solutions for you. But what about people who are so concerned about whether they can stay in the city they love or they just moved to?
But there's a better way to solve
it. Mike Johnson, briefly. Leslie Herod, we heard from you on this. Mike Johnson, briefly.
There's a better way to solve this. We can control rents and have prices not go up without having to have rent control, which stops new development. That's what we did in Proposition 123. What this does now is allows us to build new affordable units. And those affordable units, you never have to pay more than 30% of what your income is. So if you're a first-year teacher making $40,000 a year, that's $1,000 a month you'd pay in rent. And that deed-restricted unit means your rent can never go up unless your income goes up. But those units are supported.
Hold on a second. There's 13 people, so there's physically no way that we can listen to you all at once. Okay.
Those units are supported and developed by financing that allows them to stay affordable without us having to pass on higher rents to other renters in the same neighborhood.
15 seconds from Lisa Calderon. It looked like you disagreed.
Yeah, what if you can't get in one of those units? We're not talking about just certain people in certain units. We're talking about across Denver, where about half of folks are renters. So we need a broad solution and not just a few thousand here and a few thousand there.
15 seconds from Thomas Wolf.
Being a capital markets professional, if we're trying to solve a supply issue, where the capital is looking, if you're going to rent control increases the risk and decreases the reward, that capital will go somewhere else. Just full stop.
Mike Johnson, let's talk a little bit in a different direction of affordability. Your plan calls for housing density. Look around the skyline right now. Housing density means vertical housing, vertical density, and luxury vertical housing. So first I'd like to know, is there a neighborhood in Denver where density has resulted in more affordability?
In most places that I've seen, no. And that's the problem, which is we are building a bunch more units, but we're building a bunch more luxury units that are not affordable to people. And so what I would do is build 25,000 units that are affordable, and they're permanently affordable. That means you can't make them affordable for 10 years, and a new owner comes on, buys the building, and jacks up the rents again. These units would be deed restricted to be affordable forever. And that means if you're making 40,000, 50,000, 60,000, 80,000, you got people in this city that are 2 teachers married that are making $85,000 a year and can't afford to live here. So you can do that if you focus on actually building the units that we know will be affordable and keep them affordable. You can also then help folks get from renting to home ownership by making sure they can get down payment assistance to be able to get into homes. That's what I did when we built the Deerfield Fund to help black families and African American families get access to down payments to get into home ownership. We can expand that to all first-generation, first-time home buyers. People get from renting all the way to owning.
Just a short answer follow-up here. Which neighborhoods now should be expecting this influx of residents in these houses that you're describing?
Oh, we should be building affordable housing in every neighborhood in the city, and it should not be that you only concentrate affordable housing in certain neighborhoods. That's a part of the entire city's obligation, and it should be shared.
So a question to Kwame Spearman on this. You've billed your campaign as the neighborhood mayor. You want to kind of decentralize some government down to I just said it louder. You want an increased focus on neighborhood needs, okay? So what happens if you're the neighborhood mayor and a neighbor decides to opt out of affordable housing or decides to opt out of density because everybody loves it in somebody else's neighborhood?
Correct. And Marshall, I thought that was a great question. Mike, I'm not totally sure where you're going to build all of these units. And I think that's a question that the city needs to ask for. The reason why I'm the neighborhood mayor is there are neighborhoods that are not fit for density. I grew up, Hilltop, for example, where you've got Park Hill, where you live, Kyle. Like East Denver in general is not, from a transit perspective, going to handle density well. There are other neighborhoods in which people are currently being gentrified out of those neighborhoods. You've got to get density. One area that, Ian, I totally agree with you on, is the rent is too high in Capitol Hill. That is where our workforce class used to used to live. If we have greater density there, that will give us the supply and demand that we need that keep rental prices low. There's this weird division here that we can't have distinct neighborhoods that have distinct traits. For me, I grew up at 6th and Monaco, and my parents are going to be able to hopefully leave my sister and I a piece of real estate that is appreciated greatly. That is the American dream. And then there are other parts of the city that we're seeing that people are losing their ability to live in their homes. We've got to give solutions to there. That's where those micro units need to be.
I want to clarify something real quick before we move on. Under this neighborhood mayor system, who decides which neighborhoods get to opt out of affordable housing and density? Is it the neighborhood organization or is it the mayor?
It's the mayor, of course.
Okay.
Can I clarify something?
Debbie Ortega, the next question is for you.
Deed-restricted properties require access to the Colorado Housing Finance Authority tax credits. That's what buys down the cost. It's a very competitive process. Applications that are wanting to build affordable housing usually have to go through that process at least 3 or 4 cycles before being able to get their funding. So that is a challenge, and we absolutely need varying price points of housing that used to exist in our city. They don't exist today. And I think we need to be looking at different models of housing, like SRO housing, single room occupancy, very similar to the Barth Hotel or the YMCA downtown, because for some people, that communal living is very important. When people get into housing, sometimes they're very isolated. And this is more specific on the homeless side, but we need that varying price point of housing because we have this whole missing middle section that we're not really focusing on and talking about. And I believe we can do a lot of that with manufactured housing as well.
In 30 seconds, can you talk about your housing plan where you want to change the permitting process to make it easier to be able to build affordable housing? What exactly are you trying to change?
So first of all, I want to bring our workers back. I want the city open for business. Second of all, I want to make sure that we are looking at whether or not our permit office is in the right location. It used to be part of our building department, which is now known as the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, and it's now in our planning department. I've talked to a lot of contractors, even to some employees who have, they're concerned that we're not moving the process through. I don't think it's just a staffing issue. I think it's where it's at and how we're looking at that to make sure we're meeting the needs.
Thank you.
Can I respond to that? Because she misrepresented the program that I launched.
I'm going to move on. We haven't heard Trinidad Rodriguez. I'd like to get him involved here. Okay. You were part of the group that updated Blueprint Denver. That's the roadmap for Denver's growth through 2040. Yes. Blueprint Denver lists Globeville and Elyria-Swansea as areas that are most vulnerable to involuntary displacement. This area has endured years of I-70 construction and the environmental impacts of Suncor. Next, development. What can be done to protect the interests of this heavily Latino area?
The one thing that I think the Globeville, Elyria-Swansea community has called for is more control of their future. And that's frankly what every Denverite should have. The ability to stay here as long as they want, to have kids who start families here, who start careers here. And the way to do that is through my affordability plan, and this will work for Globeville, Elyria-Swansea. My view on affordability is it's an equation. It is income minus expenses, household expenses. And not enough people here are talking about income. And the thing that we can do the first step for boosting income is creating a structural relationship between the city and county of Denver and Denver Public Schools to drive student outcomes way better where they are presently totally failing. And then on the expense side, accelerating the development of townhomes, low-medium density that does respect the existing character of the neighborhood.
But part of the plan to help the residents stay residents of that area is that they need to get better income?
Yeah, everybody should be able to have better income. We should, by investing in people's knowledge and skills, because that ultimately is the thing that allows people to weather the ups and downs of the economy. With all due respect to folks who are in favor of minimum wage, that is the worst way to prop up people's income because it has a risk associated with driving jobs away to other cities and counties across lines. And, a job that's lost times the minimum wage is zero. That's the income from that job. So investing in people's skills and knowledge so that they have the ability to earn and control their own futures is exactly the way to do that.
Thank you.
So just to clarify, you would seek no minimum wage or just not Denver's recent increase in the minimum wage?
I would not seek an additional minimum wage.
Thank you. We are not going to have an extensive discussion tonight about the Park Hill Golf Course redevelopment because you've had that everywhere and you will continue to have that everywhere. But it seems like at the crux of that is not so much people fighting for development versus a golf course, because I haven't heard anybody advocate for the golf course. It seems like the question in there is the city extracting enough from the developers involved that it's a good deal? Question for you, Lisa Calderon. You're welcome to talk about Park Hill Golf Course in West Side if you want, but more generally, should Denver be demanding more of developers? And at what point does the city demand so much of developers that they risk alienating them, they take the work someplace else?
Well, we shouldn't be just handing them the keys to the city, and that's what's been happening over the past 12 years. This is about false choices between open space and development. We shouldn't be having a for-profit corporate developer deciding our housing plan in Denver. And so there's so many things that we could be doing. And no one's advocating for it to stay a golf course. What we need is to actually look at a full inventory of our city spaces, green and gray spaces, and turn those into housing. We need to demand more of our affordable housing developers. And for the Globeville, Elyria-Swansea folks who did not want a sports arena, listen to them and actually give them social housing, and actually also have a social housing development authority that community residents sit on.
Thank you.
Aurelio Martinez, you said you want neighborhood organizations to have more input about development. Neighborhood organizations, and frankly anyone, can go give their input to council right now, which makes the decisions. So do you seek to take power away from city council, giving the okay for zoning and development?
Not at all. But one thing is they don't listen to the neighborhood anyhow. So they just waste their time being in city council till midnight when the decision has been made. I'm glad you asked that, because I want to disagree with the statement that was said up there, with the statement that was said that the administration should decide where the developments goes. That's totally wrong. The neighborhood should decide what happens in their neighborhoods and any development near their neighborhoods that affects the neighborhoods. They have to be there. That is instilled in Blueprint Denver, where any developers, any development that's going to go on has to adhere to the neighborhood plan. And so far, this administration has gone against that every time. They ignore the neighborhood plan. I am saying we need to give more control to the neighborhoods, and that has to be. It has to be. It's my priority.
And what happens when every neighborhood says, not in my backyard?
And it's not in their backyard. There's plenty of land in Denver that's zoned for high density, that's zoned for developments that can do what they want to do, but they want to do it next to a neighborhood simply because they can buy the land cheaper and make more money on the bottom line, and that's not going to happen. They can move. The city can give developers incentives, and they can give them things to make their bottom dollar be profitable by building them developments where they're zoned to be. Zoning is there for protection, and we have to keep that.
Thank you.
Thomas Wolf, hold that thought. The next question is for you from Manusha Roy, and you can work in whatever you want to say.
Okay.
On the issue of cost of living, you said that you want to subsidize health care for Denver's child care workers and creative artists, among others, if and only if Denver solves homelessness and has the money to spare. Is that pitting one group in need against another?
Well, to be specific, it's the folks in the encampments, which is a subset of homelessness. I think we have to be very specific about who we're talking about, as well as when we talk about shelter versus housing. So I'd pump the brakes on giving these folks housing, but we absolutely have to get them sheltered. Currently, this indigent population gets their health care from Denver Health in the emergency room at retail pricing, probably in the whole about $2,500 from the ambulance ride to Denver Health. Denver, out of our benevolence, journals over around $30 million to Denver Health. So I'm a financial professional. In my certification, I had to be able to calculate expected losses, which is how you underwrite insurance. If you give me $30 million of expected loss, I can cover a lot more than that 2,000 population. To the extent that I could use the balance of that, let's use that for people that are NGOs. There's a terrific number of 10-member staffs that have to go out and shop for health insurance. Let's use that budget for them, our creative class, daycare workers, all of those folks.
Jim Walsh, you've called for a universal basic income in Denver. Who would qualify? How in the world do you pay for that?
It would pay for itself in what would be saved by the city through incarceration, through substance use. It would pay for itself. There's universal basic income programs that have been used experimentally all over the country, and Denver is using one currently. The data seems very clear that the people that know best how to use more resources are the people who need them. And so I think the whole conversation around housing is important, and many of the ideas I'm hearing here today are great ideas. But for me, the central question here is the massive disparity of wealth we have in our society. That the average CEO salary used to be around 30 times the average worker. It's now over 300. The minimum wage, if it had kept pace with inflation since the 60s, today would be well into the 20s. If it had kept pace with CEO salaries, it would be in the 60s. And so what we really need to be addressing is helping people with resources, and that includes a higher minimum wage, that includes universal basic income, and it includes support for union density in this city.
And just
Denver workers first.
And just to clarify, obviously the word universal has a dictionary definition, but you mentioned Denver has a pilot program for people experiencing homelessness. When you talk about UBI, you truly do mean everyone.
I don't mean everyone. I mean it would certainly be centered on the most needy in our society.
Do you know where that cutoff would be?
You know, that would have to come over many, many conversations, where that cutoff would be. But I think we have to confront the idea that people who face poverty are to blame for their economic situation. We have to confront that idea directly. And I think another thing that needs to be part of this conversation too, friends, is helping workers organize. Workers all over this country, in Starbucks, in Amazon, are desperately trying to organize. And they're doing this because workers today do not have a fair deal. They do not have a fair deal. The office of the mayor ought to be an ally in that movement, and I intend to be that mayor.
So I have two yes-no questions for you on that idea of unionization. You want more city workers unionized. Does that include sanitation workers?
Yes.
Would you allow them to strike?
Yes.
Because that gets city's attention in a hurry.
Yes. 1968 Memphis.
Okay, thank you.
Terrence Roberts, you've previously said that there are too many housing units sitting empty in Denver that could be used for affordable housing. That's a program the city already has right now. So what, as mayor, would you be doing to scale up that program to reach more people?
I mean, and I've said this a couple times already, the conversation of affordable housing, which is what a lot of our candidates are pushing, affordable housing is owned by developers. Nobody is moving from Colfax and Broadway into an affordable housing unit without that middle ground of housing, which will be public housing, and then they can get the help they need for substance abuse, for mental health, domestic violence, or whatever, and then they can move into affordable housing. We have over 20,000 units in the metro area empty because nobody is transitioning from chronic homelessness into affordable housing. People cannot even afford affordable housing, so we need to get people into those units before we keep this heavy emphasis on these huge structures that are going up to just keep developers busy. Affordable housing is owned by developers. Public/social housing is owned by everyone in this room if you're a Denver resident and you are a taxpayer. And that's what we'll do.
Chris Hansen, when we talk about affordability, it's usually housing, like we've been talking about right now. But right now, affordability is also our Xcel and utility bills in Denver Xcel. You say you will negotiate directly with Xcel to protect Denver residents from excessive gas and electric bills. But it's the state and the Public Utilities Commission that approve and set those rates. So what do you mean that you will negotiate directly with Xcel?
Well, I want to make sure Denver voters know that the next mayor is going to be doing the next franchise agreement with Xcel. And I'm in discussions with them right now about mistakes that have been made in the last few years that led to higher bills. First of all, we didn't have natural gas price protection in place. It's called hedging. Very low amount of that was in place. That was a mistake. The second thing that happened is the storm costs from the Winter Storm Uri in 2021. That's now a $12 adder on everybody's bill. And there were several ways that could have been handled at the PUC and by Xcel that they weren't. So these are complicated negotiations, and this is, I think, a big part of what the next mayor has to do to protect customers, in this case, with the agreement with Xcel. And I have a huge amount of professional experience doing that. I've done that for years at the state legislature and have delivered over and over for our customers in the state.
I'm getting a crash course in this in the last few weeks, but I believe the franchise fee is the agreement with Xcel that you can have use of the right-of-way without keep coming back to the city for permission. You can dig underground, use our right-of-way. Boulder tried to get out of the Xcel business around the time of the franchise agreement. That didn't work out so good with Boulder. How is it going to work out better with Denver?
Yeah, I don't think it's about driving what Boulder was trying to do, which is a municipalization conversation, and that's a worthy conversation. But it leads to lots of unintended consequences, which I think Boulder found out the hard way. What I'm saying is the next mayor is that we've got a chance to really improve the relationship with Xcel and drive lower and lower costs. And the thing we haven't talked about at all tonight is how do we improve the environmental performance of Denver, lower the emissions, improve air quality. The brown cloud is still over our heads. And one of the best ways to do that is to make sure you've got the right conditions in place with the utilities. Denver has a multi-billion-dollar opportunity to electrify our transportation, heat pumps for heating and cooling. It drastically lowers customers' bills. That's the kind of negotiation we need to have with Xcel.
Thank you.
Leslie Herod, a big concern with affordable housing is also climate change and how to make living greener affordable to everyone, not just the rich. So what is your vision for city planning that would be addressing environmental injustice?
Absolutely. I think that's a great question. And my colleague mentioned the brown cloud that we live in here. And as someone with asthma, as someone like many folks out there whose kids have asthma today, we know that Denver is not the cleanest city in the nation to live in. Our air quality on a summer day, if we go outside and I go out and walk my dog, it's akin to smoking 1 to 2 packs of cigarettes a day. And I don't smoke. That's unacceptable. We've got to hold these gross polluters accountable, period. That's the #1 priority. When we know the health outcomes in North Denver by I-70, by the Suncor, right? We know what's happened to those families. We know the poor health outcomes because of living next to that pollution. We need to address it. We need to address it. We need to hold those gross polluters accountable, #1. Affordable housing does not mean that it has to go in places that are unsafe to live in. That's been a way that this country has done things for too long, where black, brown, and low-income folks have lived right next to polluters because it was affordable. I disagree. Park Hill should have affordable housing. Should have affordable housing. People who live in Park Hill right now, their kids should be able to buy in Park Hill when they're ready to, and we can do that.
Thank you.